A deaf nobleman's daughter, shunned by society and ignored even by her father, lives in silent isolation until a new companion arrives who can speak her language. As their connection transforms the household and challenges aristocratic prejudice, everyone must ask, what would happen if we truly saw the person behind the difference? London sparkled with light and laughter on this warm summer evening in 1815. The Duchess of Haverford's annual ball was the crown jewel of the social season, a night when fortunes could be made or lost with a single dance or whispered word. Inside the grand ballroom, hundreds of candles glowed in crystal chandeliers, casting golden light over the cream of society. Ladies in silk dresses floated across polished floors, their jewels twinkling like stars. Gentlemen in perfectly tailored coats bowed and smiled, each hoping to secure advantageous connections. In the quietest corner of this dazzling world stood Miss Charlotte Winters, 22 years old and painfully aware of her place. She held her glass of lemonade with careful fingers, her back straight as a ruler, her face a mask of pleasant interest that hid her true feelings. Charlotte's blue dress was simple but well made, showing she belonged here, barely. Unlike the other young ladies who laughed and flirted freely, Charlotte watched her every move with the care of someone walking on thin ice. "Miss Winters, you look lovely tonight," said Mrs. Pembroke, an older lady with kind eyes. "Though I must say you could wear a bit more color. A young lady should shine at these events." Charlotte smiled politely. "You're too kind, Mrs. Pembroke. I find blue suits me well enough." What Charlotte didn't say was that this dress had been carefully remade 3 times over the years. Once her family name had opened every door in London. Now, after her father's bad investments and her mother's illness, the Winters name whispered only of faded glory. This single dress, her one good pair of gloves, and her mother's small pearl earrings were all she could manage for the season. "Have you danced this evening?" Mrs. Pembroke asked, looking around the room for potential partners. "Not yet," Charlotte replied. "I find watching can be just as enjoyable." Another lie. Charlotte had once loved dancing more than anything. As a girl, she had spun around her family's large drawing room, dreaming of balls like this. Now she stood on the edges by choice. A dance might tear her carefully mended slippers. A wrong step might reveal that she didn't belong here anymore. Across the room, Charlotte spotted her younger sister Emma, just 17 and still believing in happy endings. Emma danced with a young man from a good family, her cheeks pink with joy. Charlotte felt a tight squeeze in her chest. Everything she did now was for Emma, every smile, every careful word, every sacrifice. "Your sister seems to be enjoying herself," Mrs. Pembroke noted. "Perhaps this season will be lucky for her." "I hope so," Charlotte said softly. More than hope, she prayed for it nightly. If Emma could make a good match, their family might survive. Charlotte had already turned down 2 offers from older men with money, but no kindness in their eyes. She would do what was needed for her family, but she wanted better for Emma. "And for yourself, my dear," Mrs. Pembroke pressed. "Surely you don't intend to remain unmarried much longer?" Charlotte's smile tightened. "I find I'm quite content with my situation, Mrs. Pembroke. Not every woman needs to rush to the altar." This was her 3rd season, likely her last. At home, bills piled higher each day. Her father spent most days in his study, lost in his regrets. Her mother grew weaker, needing expensive medicines. Charlotte had secretly begun looking into positions as a governess or companion, jobs no lady of her birth should ever consider, but pride fed no one. Soon she would need to disappear from this glittering world forever. "Well, I think it's a shame," Mrs. Pembroke huffed. "A girl with your good manners and education should make some good man very happy." Before Charlotte could reply, a stir near the ballroom entrance caught everyone's attention. The crowd parted like water, and Charlotte felt the mood of the entire room shift. "Is that," Mrs. Pembroke gasped, "the Duke of Westmoreland?" Someone whispered nearby. "I didn't think he'd show his face in society this season." Charlotte couldn't help but stare along with everyone else. The Duke stood taller than most men in the room, his broad shoulders making his black evening clothes look as if they'd been painted on him. His face could have been carved from stone, handsome but hard, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw now tight with tension. Unlike the other smiling guests, the Duke looked as though he'd rather be anywhere else. "They say he hasn't attended a ball in nearly 5 years," Mrs. Pembroke whispered excitedly. "Not since his wife passed, and never with—" Charlotte followed Mrs. Pembroke's gaze and noticed a young woman standing slightly behind the Duke. She was strikingly beautiful with golden hair and blue eyes, dressed in an exquisite gown of pale green silk. But something about her seemed different. While everyone else chatted and laughed, she stood perfectly still, her eyes moving quickly around the room, as if trying to make sense of it all. "His daughter," Mrs. Pembroke continued, lowering her voice further. "Lady Eleanor, born deaf as a post, poor thing. They say that's why the Duchess died. from heartbreak over having a child who wasn't, well, complete. Charlotte felt a rush of heat to her cheeks. "I'm sure that's not true," she said more sharply than she intended. "And I hardly think being deaf makes someone incomplete." Mrs. Pembroke looked startled. "Well, I'm only repeating what I've heard. In any case, it's a shame. Such a pretty girl, but what future could she have? No one will dance with her. No one can even speak to her." As if feeling Charlotte's gaze, the Duke suddenly looked directly at her from across the room. His eyes were dark and intense, seeming to see right through her careful mask to the worry beneath. Charlotte couldn't look away, though her heart beat faster under that searching gaze. For just a moment she felt truly seen, not as the polite, invisible Miss Winters, but as herself, with all her hidden fears and dreams. The Duke nodded slightly, then turned away, placing a protective hand on his daughter's arm. But in that brief connection, Charlotte felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock long forgotten. Something important had just happened, though she couldn't possibly know what it meant, not yet. 3 days after the Duchess of Haverford's ball, Charlotte sat in her family's small sitting room, mending a tear in Emma's best dress. Sunlight filtered through worn curtains, casting patterns on the faded carpet. The room had once been filled with fine furniture and art, but piece by piece they had sold almost everything of value. What remained was clean but shabby, a shadow of their former prosperity. Charlotte's fingers worked the needle skillfully as she tried not to worry about the letter that had arrived that morning. Their landlord wanted the rent by the end of the week. Their father had locked himself in his study again, refusing to discuss the matter. "You have a visitor, miss," announced their only remaining servant, an older woman who stayed out of loyalty, rather than for her meager wages. Charlotte looked up in surprise. They rarely received visitors anymore. "Who is it, Mrs. Hill?" "A gentleman says he's from the Duke of Westmoreland's household," Mrs. Hill whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Charlotte's heart jumped. She quickly tucked her needle into the fabric and smoothed her simple day dress. "Show him in, please." A moment later, a thin man with graying hair and the stiff manner of a high-ranking servant entered the room. He bowed formally. "Miss Charlotte Winters, I am Mr. Phillips, the Duke of Westmoreland's personal secretary. His Grace requests your presence at Westmoreland House tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock precisely." Charlotte felt her mouth go dry. "The Duke wishes to see me. May I ask why?" The secretary's face remained perfectly blank. "His Grace did not share his reasons with me, Miss Winters. He merely instructed me to deliver this invitation." He handed her a heavy cream envelope with a red wax seal bearing the Duke's family crest. After the secretary left, Charlotte broke the seal with shaking fingers. The note inside, written in bold, slanting handwriting, simply confirmed the invitation with an address in Grosvenor Square. "What could the Duke of Westmoreland possibly want with me?" Charlotte whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Charlotte stood before Westmoreland House, a magnificent mansion that took up nearly half the square. Tall white columns framed the entrance, and large windows gleamed in the morning sun. Charlotte had worn her best day dress, a modest blue gown that had once been her mother's, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. A footman in the Duke's livery led her through a marble entrance hall larger than her family's entire home. Charlotte tried not to stare at the paintings that lined the walls or the intricate plasterwork on the ceiling. She was shown into a study where polished bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling. A massive desk dominated the room, and behind it stood the Duke himself. "Miss Winters," he said without smiling, "thank you for coming." His voice was deep and smooth, but cool as winter. Charlotte curtsied. "Your Grace, it was kind of you to invite me. Please sit." He gestured to a chair across from his desk. As Charlotte sat, she noticed his eyes were not the black she'd thought at the ball, but a very dark blue, like the sky just before a storm. The Duke remained standing, his tall frame casting a shadow across the desk. "I'll come directly to the point, Miss Winters. I've made inquiries about you." Charlotte's hands tightened in her lap. "Inquiries, Your Grace, about your family circumstances, your character, your education." He began pacing slowly behind his desk. "I understand your father was once quite prosperous, but recent years have been difficult." Heat crept up Charlotte's neck. "My family's situation is not a secret, Your Grace, though it's not something we discuss in public." The Duke nodded. "I appreciate directness, Miss Winters. So, allow me to be equally direct. I need someone to serve as a companion to my daughter, Lady Eleanor." Charlotte's surprise must have shown on her face because the Duke continued more sharply. "I saw you watching her at the Duchess's ball. You seemed different from the others, less judgmental." "It's not my place to judge anyone, Your Grace," Charlotte replied carefully. "No, it isn't." The Duke stopped pacing and fixed her with his intense gaze. Lady Eleanor was born unable to hear. She reads lips somewhat, but communication is challenging. Previous companions have not lasted long. Charlotte thought of the beautiful young woman she'd seen at the ball, standing so still amidst the swirling dancers. How does Lady Eleanor communicate her thoughts? Something flickered in the Duke's eyes, surprise perhaps. She writes notes when necessary. Mostly, she keeps to herself. That must be very lonely for her, Charlotte said softly. The Duke's jaw tightened. My daughter has everything she could possibly need, Miss Winters. What she requires is proper supervision and someone to help her navigate social situations when necessary. Someone discreet, well-bred, but not prone to gossip. Charlotte felt a strange mix of sadness and anger. The Duke spoke about his daughter as if she were a slightly troublesome pet rather than a young woman with feelings and dreams of her own. The position offers a generous salary, the Duke continued, naming a sum that made Charlotte's breath catch. It was more money than she had seen in years, enough to pay their debts and secure proper medical care for her mother, along with room and board here at Westmoreland House, of course. You seem to know a great deal about my family's situation, Your Grace, Charlotte said, struggling to keep her voice steady. I make it my business to know what I need to know, Miss Winters. The Duke returned to his chair, sitting down with the easy confidence of a man used to power. Your family name is still respected, despite your father's misfortunes. You were properly educated. You have no romantic entanglements that might distract you. In short, you are suitable. Charlotte wondered if he could hear how cold he sounded, reducing her entire life to a list of qualifications. And if I accept, what exactly would my duties be? You would accompany Lady Eleanor during the day, help her with her correspondence, attend her if she wishes to walk in the garden or ride in the park, ensure she behaves appropriately when guests visit. The Duke picked up a pen, turning it slowly between his fingers. It's not difficult work, but it requires patience. Charlotte thought of her family's empty cupboards, her mother's worsening cough, her sister's fading dreams. Then she thought of Lady Eleanor, trapped in silence, with this cold man as her only family. May I meet Lady Eleanor before I decide? Charlotte asked. The Duke looked genuinely surprised. Most people are more interested in the salary than meeting my daughter. I would be spending my days with Lady Eleanor, not with the salary, Your Grace, Charlotte replied, then immediately worried she'd overstepped. To her surprise, the corner of the Duke's mouth twitched slightly. A fair point. He rang a small bell on his desk. Phillips, please ask Lady Eleanor to join us. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Lady Eleanor entered the room, her golden hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her simple morning dress the color of spring leaves. Up close, Charlotte was struck by how young she looked, no more than 18, and how intelligent her clear blue eyes were. Those eyes now moved from her father to Charlotte with obvious curiosity. The Duke spoke slowly, clearly facing his daughter. Eleanor, this is Miss Winters. She may become your new companion. Lady Eleanor studied Charlotte's face carefully, then nodded politely. She reached into a small pocket and pulled out a tiny notebook and pencil, quickly writing something before handing it to Charlotte. In neat, elegant handwriting were the words, Do you like music, Miss Winters? Charlotte looked up, meeting Lady Eleanor's questioning gaze. There was something in those eyes, hope, perhaps, or loneliness, that made Charlotte's decision for her. Yes, Lady Eleanor, she said clearly, making sure the young woman could see her lips. I like music very much. A week later, Charlotte arrived at Westmoreland House with a small trunk containing everything she owned. The early morning fog wrapped around the grand building, making it seem to float above the street like a ship on a misty sea. Charlotte paused at the bottom of the white stone steps, her heart beating fast in her chest. From this moment on, her life would be different. She would no longer be Miss Charlotte Winters of the fading family name, but rather Lady Eleanor's companion, a position somewhere between servant and equal. A footman carried her trunk inside, while Mr. Phillips, the Duke's secretary, greeted her in the vast entrance hall. His thin face showed no emotion as he spoke. His Grace is away on business today, Miss Winters. I'll show you to your rooms, and then Lady Eleanor would like to meet with you in the library. Charlotte followed the secretary up a wide staircase that curved gracefully to the second floor. Their footsteps echoed on the marble steps. Paintings of stern-faced men and beautiful women in old-fashioned clothes lined the walls, watching her climb. These must be the Duke's ancestors, Charlotte thought, generations of wealth and power captured in oil and gilt frames. Mr. Phillips led her down a long corridor where thick carpet silenced their steps. The family rooms are in the east wing, he explained. The Duke's suite is at the end of this hallway. Lady Eleanor's rooms are here. He pointed to a set of double doors. And these will be your quarters. He opened a door to reveal a sitting room, larger than her family's entire parlor. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the garden below. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and comfortable furniture in shades of blue and green invited her to sit and rest. "There is a bedroom through that door," Mr. Phillips continued, "and a small dressing room beyond it. The bell pull there will summon a maid if you require assistance. Lady Eleanor's lady's maid, Ruth, will help you unpack." Charlotte walked to the window, touching the heavy silk curtains with careful fingers. "These rooms are beautiful," she said softly. "I wasn't expecting anything so fine." Mr. Phillips's face remained blank, but his voice softened slightly. "The Duke is particular about appearances, Miss Winters. As Lady Eleanor's companion, you reflect on the family. Now, I'll leave you to settle in. Lady Eleanor will expect you in the library in 1 hour." After he left, Charlotte sat on the edge of a velvet chair, suddenly overwhelmed. The salary the Duke had offered her was already deposited at her family's bank. Her mother could now see the best doctors in London. Emma could have new dresses, and perhaps even a proper season next year. Her father's debts would no longer hang over them like a dark cloud, but as she looked around at her new rooms, Charlotte felt strangely small. The Winters family had never been as wealthy as the Duke, but they had been respected, comfortable. Now she was accepting charity dressed up as employment, living in rooms far finer than she deserved. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A young woman with kind eyes and brown hair, tucked neatly under a cap, entered. "Miss Winters, I'm Ruth, Lady Eleanor's maid. I've come to help you unpack." Ruth helped Charlotte arrange her few belongings in the large wardrobe and drawers. Her 3 simple dresses and single good gown looked lost in the spacious dressing room. "The Duke has arranged for the dressmaker to visit tomorrow," Ruth explained. "You'll need more suitable clothing." "The Duke is having dresses made for me?" Charlotte asked, surprised. Ruth nodded. "He's very particular about how the household appears. Don't worry, he's done the same for all of Lady Eleanor's companions." "How many companions has Lady Eleanor had?" Charlotte asked carefully, Ruth's hands stilled on the fabric she was folding. "4 in the past year alone. Most don't stay long." She seemed to hesitate, then added more quietly, "It's not Lady Eleanor's fault. She's a sweet girl, just different. People don't understand her. They get frustrated or frightened and leave." Charlotte thought of the intelligent blue eyes that had studied her so carefully in the Duke's study. "How does Lady Eleanor feel about all these people coming and going from her life?" "She doesn't complain," Ruth said, but her face showed sadness. "She never complains about anything. That's part of the problem, I think. No one knows what she wants or needs because she can't tell them or won't." An hour later, Charlotte made her way downstairs to the library. Unlike the bright, airy rooms upstairs, the library was a warm, dark space lined with thousands of leather-bound books. Heavy green curtains filtered the light to a soft glow. The smell of paper, leather, and beeswax polish filled the air. Lady Eleanor sat in a window seat, a book open on her lap. Sunlight caught her golden hair, making it shine like a halo around her delicate face. When she saw Charlotte, she quickly closed her book and stood, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth. She was taller than Charlotte had realized, and held herself with perfect grace. Lady Eleanor reached for her ever-present notebook and wrote quickly. She handed the note to Charlotte. "Welcome to Westmoreland House, Miss Winters. I hope your rooms are comfortable." "They're lovely. Thank you, Lady Eleanor," Charlotte replied, making sure to face the young woman directly so she could see her lips. "The whole house is beautiful." Lady Eleanor's smile widened slightly. She wrote again, "Would you like to see more of it? I could show you around." For the next hour, Lady Eleanor led Charlotte through the grand house. Each room seemed more impressive than the last. The formal dining room could seat 30 people at its long table gleaming with polish. The music room held a magnificent pianoforte and a harp covered in dust. The portrait gallery displayed generations of the Duke's family in gilded frames. Charlotte noticed that Lady Eleanor moved through these grand spaces like a ghost, touching nothing, leaving no mark of her presence. The house seemed to belong to history and to the Duke, but not to his daughter. They ended their tour in a small sitting room tucked away at the back of the house. Unlike the formal rooms they had visited, this space felt lived in. Books were stacked on tables, a half-finished embroidery project lay on a chair, and sketches of birds and flowers were pinned to a corkboard on one wall. Lady Eleanor wrote, "This is my private sitting room. Father rarely comes here." Charlotte looked at the drawings more closely. "Did you make these? They're beautiful." Pride flickered in Lady Eleanor's eyes as she nodded. She opened a drawer and brought out a sketchbook, showing Charlotte page after page of detailed drawings, gardens, animals, and people caught in moments of natural movement. "You have a remarkable talent," Charlotte said truthfully. "I've never seen such lifelike drawings." Lady Eleanor's cheeks turned pink with pleasure. She wrote, "I watch everything carefully. People don't notice me watching." The simple statement made Charlotte's heart ache. How lonely it must be to always watch from the outside, never truly part of the world around you. A bell rang somewhere in the house, making Charlotte jump. Lady Eleanor seemed to feel the vibration as she looked up and closed her sketchbook. She wrote, "That's the luncheon bell. We must go to the dining room." As they walked back through the house, Charlotte noticed a tall, stern-looking woman coming toward them. Her grey hair was pulled back severely, and her black dress, while fine, was plain and unadorned. Lady Eleanor's shoulders stiffened visibly. She quickly wrote, "Mrs. Drake, the housekeeper. She doesn't like me." Before Charlotte could respond, the housekeeper was upon them, her cold eyes assessing Charlotte from head to toe. "Miss Winters, I presume. I am Mrs. Drake." Her voice matched her appearance, rigid and unwelcoming. "I trust Lady Eleanor has been behaving herself." Charlotte felt a flare of anger at the woman's tone. "Lady Eleanor has been kind enough to show me around the house, Mrs. Drake. She's been a perfect hostess." Mrs. Drake's thin lips pressed together. "Indeed. Well, luncheon is served. His Grace insists that meals are taken promptly, even in his absence." As they followed the housekeeper, Lady Eleanor slipped her small warm hand into Charlotte's and squeezed once, quickly, before letting go. In that brief touch, Charlotte felt something shift inside her chest, a fierce protectiveness rising like a wave. Whatever challenges this strange new life might bring, she would not abandon this young woman to the cold formality of Westmoreland House, no matter what. 2 weeks passed, and Charlotte settled into the rhythm of life at Westmoreland House. Each morning began with breakfast in Lady Eleanor's private sitting room. Charlotte would arrive at precisely 8 o'clock to find Eleanor already dressed and waiting, her golden hair neatly pinned and her eyes bright with quiet excitement. These morning hours quickly became Charlotte's favorite part of the day. Away from the watching eyes of servants and the Duke's stern presence, Eleanor seemed to relax, her natural spirit shining through. During their first week together, Charlotte had made an important discovery. In a corner of Eleanor's dressing room, hidden behind dresses rarely worn, she found a small worn book. Its pages contained hand-drawn pictures paired with strange gestures. When Eleanor caught her looking at it, fear had flashed across her face. "Is this a way to speak without words?" Charlotte had asked, careful to face Eleanor directly. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded slowly. She took the book and pointed to a picture of a hand with fingers spread wide, then made the same shape with her own hand. "Does this mean something?" Charlotte asked. Eleanor nodded again, then pointed to another picture of an open hand moving in a circle over the heart. She made this motion, then pointed to Charlotte. "Is this my name?" Charlotte guessed. Eleanor's face lit up with such joy that Charlotte felt her heart squeeze in her chest. That evening, after Eleanor had gone to bed, Charlotte stayed up late studying the little book by candlelight, practicing the hand shapes and movements until her fingers ached. The next morning, when Charlotte entered the sitting room, she raised her hand in the greeting sign she had practiced. Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer, her blue eyes widening in shock. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face like sunshine breaking through clouds. Now their mornings followed a new pattern. Eleanor would teach Charlotte 3 new signs each day. Charlotte would practice them until she could make them smoothly, her fingers gradually learning this new silent language. Some days it was frustrating. Her hands felt clumsy and slow compared to Eleanor's graceful movements. But the joy on Eleanor's face when Charlotte successfully signed a complete sentence made every struggle worthwhile. "Where did you learn these signs?" Charlotte asked one morning, careful to sign the words as she spoke them. Eleanor hesitated, then wrote in her notebook, "My mother found a teacher before she died. Father stopped the lessons after she was gone, said it wasn't proper." Charlotte felt a flare of anger toward the Duke. To deny his daughter a way to speak seemed cruelly unfair. "Well," she said firmly, "I think it's very proper and very clever." Beyond their private morning lessons, Charlotte and Eleanor followed the schedule the Duke had laid out. They worked on embroidery in the mornings, though Charlotte soon discovered Eleanor's clever fingers could create stitches far more beautiful than her own. They walked in the garden every afternoon, weather permitting, Eleanor pointing out birds and plants she had sketched. Charlotte read aloud for an hour each day, watching Eleanor's eyes follow her lips, sometimes understanding, sometimes not, but always attentive. The Duke returned from his business trip on the 10th day. He summoned Charlotte to his study that evening, his dark eyes searching her face as she entered. "How are things progressing with my daughter, Miss Winters?" he asked without preamble. "Very well, Your Grace," Charlotte replied. "Lady Eleanor is a delight to work with. She's intelligent and kind." The Duke's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Indeed, most find her difficult to understand." "Perhaps they don't try hard enough," Charlotte said, then bit her lip, worried she had spoken too boldly. But the Duke merely studied her for a long moment. "You haven't found the position too Isolating? Most young women prefer more lively company. Charlotte thought of the quiet joy in Eleanor's eyes when she successfully signed a new word, the gentle pressure of her hand when she guided Charlotte's fingers into the right position. I find Lady Eleanor's company quite satisfying, Your Grace. She has much to say, if one knows how to listen. Something flickered in the Duke's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or doubt. Very well, you may continue as you have been. I've instructed Mrs. Drake to add you to the invitation list for the small dinner party we're hosting next week. Lady Eleanor rarely attends such functions, but it would be good for her to make an appearance, if only briefly. After the meeting, Charlotte hurried back to Eleanor, who was waiting anxiously in her sitting room. What did Father want? She signed, her movements sharp with worry. Just to see how we're getting along, Charlotte signed back, her fingers moving slowly but accurately. He says there's a dinner party next week. He wants you to attend. Eleanor's face fell, her hands dropping to her sides. I hate parties, she signed. People stare. They talk about me, not to me. I'll be with you, Charlotte promised, reaching for Eleanor's hands. We'll face them together. The next day, the Duke joined them for breakfast in the main dining room, a rare occurrence that made Eleanor sit straighter in her chair, her face becoming a careful mask that revealed nothing. Charlotte noticed how the Duke spoke to her about Eleanor as if his daughter weren't present, asking about her progress with embroidery and her behavior with the servants. Actually, Your Grace, Charlotte said, choosing her words carefully, Lady Eleanor has been teaching me something quite remarkable. She raised her hands and slowly signed. Good morning, Father. The Duke's fork clattered against his plate. What are you doing? He demanded. It's called sign language, Your Grace, Charlotte explained. Lady Eleanor knows hundreds of signs. She's been teaching me to communicate with her this way. The Duke's face darkened. I'm aware of what it is, Miss Winters. My late wife was quite taken with the idea. I, however, found it encouraged Eleanor's isolation rather than helping her join normal society. But, Your Grace, Charlotte persisted, feeling Eleanor's eyes on her face, it gives her a voice. Surely that's important. What's important, the Duke said coldly, is that my daughter learn to function in the world as it is, not create a separate world that only she can access. Charlotte felt Eleanor's foot press against hers under the table, a warning to stop. Of course, Your Grace, she murmured, lowering her hands to her lap. Later that afternoon, as they walked in the garden, Eleanor's hands flew in agitated signs. Father will send you away if you argue with him. I wasn't arguing, Charlotte signed back. I was explaining. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes sad. It's the same to him. Others tried. They left. Charlotte stopped walking and turned to face Eleanor fully. I'm not leaving, she signed, making each movement clear and firm. I promise. That night, unable to sleep, Charlotte slipped down to the library. Perhaps she could find a book that might help her learn more signs or explain the Duke's resistance to this form of communication. As she browsed the shelves by candlelight, she heard the library door open. The Duke stood there, still dressed, though it was well past midnight. Miss Winters, he said, surprise evident in his voice. What are you doing awake at this hour? I couldn't sleep, Your Grace, Charlotte admitted. I was looking for a book. The Duke stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. In the candlelight, his face seemed less stern, the shadows softening his sharp features. Which book were you hoping to find? Charlotte hesitated, then decided on honesty. Anything about sign language, Your Grace. I want to understand it better, to help Lady Eleanor. The Duke sighed, moving to a shelf near the window. He ran his fingers along the spines of several volumes before pulling one out. My wife collected these, he said quietly. After the doctors confirmed Eleanor would never hear, he handed Charlotte a slim book bound in faded blue leather. Its pages were filled with illustrations of hand shapes and their meanings. You loved your wife very much, Charlotte said softly, seeing the pain in his face. She was everything to me, the Duke replied, his voice rough. When we discovered Eleanor's condition, Margaret was determined our daughter would have a full life. She learned these signs, taught them to Eleanor. They had a language all their own. He turned away, staring into the darkness beyond the window. When Margaret died, it was as if she took half of Eleanor with her, the half I could reach. Charlotte's heart ached for this proud, wounded man. Your Grace, she said gently, Eleanor is still here. All of her. She's just waiting for someone to see her. The Duke turned back, his face once again the mask of cold control she knew. Keep the book, Miss Winters. If you believe these signs will help you manage my daughter, then by all means use them. But remember your place. You are here to guide Eleanor, not encourage fanciful notions. He left the library without another word. his footsteps fading down the hall. Charlotte stood holding the book, feeling its weight in her hands. It was more than just paper and ink. It was a bridge between worlds, between a father and daughter, separated by silence and grief. That night, Charlotte made a silent vow. She would learn every sign in this book. She would give Eleanor a voice that even her father could hear. Somehow, she would help heal this broken family, no matter what it cost her. The night of the Duke's dinner party arrived with a soft rain pattering against the windows of Westmoreland House. Charlotte helped Eleanor dress in a gown of pale blue silk that matched her eyes. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as Charlotte fastened the tiny pearl buttons down the back of her dress. "You look beautiful," Charlotte signed, turning Eleanor to face the mirror. Eleanor's fingers moved in quick reply. "They will stare. They always stare." "Let them," Charlotte answered with firm hands. "We'll show them how elegant and poised you are." For the past week, they had practiced how Eleanor might navigate the dinner party. Charlotte had taught her simple responses to common questions people might ask. They had rehearsed how Eleanor could watch others and follow their lead for the proper fork to use or when to raise her glass. But most importantly, Charlotte had promised to stay by Eleanor's side, translating conversations when possible, helping her understand what was happening around her. The guests began arriving at 7 o'clock. From the top of the grand staircase, Charlotte and Eleanor watched as ladies in colorful silks and gentlemen in black evening clothes handed their cloaks to waiting footmen. Charlotte felt Eleanor's hand slip into hers, squeezing tightly. "Remember," Charlotte signed with her free hand, "you are the daughter of a duke. You belong here more than anyone." Eleanor nodded, her face a careful mask of calm that Charlotte had come to recognize as her public face. Together they descended the stairs to join the gathering in the main drawing room. The Duke stood near the fireplace, greeting his guests with cool politeness. When he saw Eleanor, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. In their weeks together, Charlotte had learned that Eleanor rarely attended social gatherings at the house, preferring to stay in her rooms when visitors came. "Lady Eleanor," the Duke said, inclining his head slightly, "I'm pleased you've decided to join us this evening." Charlotte translated his words into signs, her fingers moving discreetly at her side where only Eleanor could see. Eleanor smiled and nodded at her father before moving to sit on a small sofa near the window. The evening progressed smoothly at first. The Duke's guests were mostly older gentlemen who discussed politics and business, paying little attention to Eleanor. Charlotte remained beside her, occasionally translating interesting bits of conversation. Eleanor seemed content to simply watch the room, her artist's eyes noting details of dress and movement that she would later sketch in her journal. Just before dinner was announced, the drawing room door opened to admit a late arrival. A tall man with fair hair and sharp features entered, his manner casual as he greeted the Duke. "Lord Barton," the Duke said, his voice noticeably cooler, "I wasn't certain you would join us tonight." "I wouldn't miss it, Westmoreland," Lord Barton replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "London grows dreadfully dull this time of year." Charlotte felt Eleanor stiffen beside her. "Who is that man?" she signed quickly. "Lord Barton?" Charlotte signed back. "Do you know him?" Eleanor's face had gone pale. "He was Mother's cousin. He visited sometimes before she died. He makes Father angry." Charlotte watched as Lord Barton circled the room, greeting the other guests with easy charm. There was something in his manner that made her uncomfortable, a slickness, a falseness that reminded her of the men who had circled her father when his gambling debts grew too large. When Lord Barton's gaze finally fell on Eleanor, his smile widened. "Lady Eleanor," he said, crossing to bow over her hand. "How delightful to see you again after so long. You've grown into quite the beauty, just like your dear mother." Charlotte translated his words, watching Eleanor's face carefully. Eleanor nodded politely but didn't smile. Lord Barton's eyes flicked to Charlotte, assessing her in one quick glance. "And who might this be? A new companion for my little cousin?" Before Charlotte could answer, the Duke appeared at their side. "Miss Charlotte Winters," he said stiffly. "She has been Lady Eleanor's companion for nearly a month now." "Winters?" Lord Barton raised an eyebrow. "Not Arthur Winters' daughter." Charlotte felt a chill run down her spine. "Yes, my lord, Sir Arthur is my father." "How interesting!" Lord Barton's smile grew sharper. "I believe I may have had some business with your father a few years ago. Cards, if I recall correctly." The Duke's face hardened. "Dinner is served, Barton. Perhaps you'd be good enough to escort Mrs. Jameson to the dining room." Throughout dinner, Charlotte kept a careful eye on Lord Barton. He was seated several places away, but she could feel his gaze returning to her and Eleanor repeatedly. Eleanor, seated between two elderly gentlemen who made no effort to include her in their conversation, kept her eyes on her plate, only looking up when Charlotte gently tapped her hand to translate something important. After the meal, the gentlemen remained for port and cigars, while the ladies withdrew to the drawing room. Charlotte guided Eleanor to a quiet corner where they could observe without needing to participate in the scattered conversations about fashion and gossip. "Are you tired?" Charlotte signed. "We could slip upstairs if you wish." Eleanor shook her head. "Not yet. Father would notice." An hour passed before the gentleman rejoined them. Charlotte noticed immediately that Lord Barton's face was flushed from too much port, his movements less controlled as he made his way directly to where she sat with Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor," he said, dropping onto the sofa beside them, "your father tells me you still cannot hear a single sound. How terribly sad. Your mother had such hopes that you might be cured." Charlotte's hands moved quickly, translating his words. Eleanor's face remained calm, but Charlotte saw the hurt in her eyes. "There is nothing wrong with Lady Eleanor that needs curing, my lord," Charlotte said coolly. "She simply experiences the world differently than we do." Lord Barton laughed, a harsh sound that made heads turn in their direction. "How charmingly naive, Miss Winters, but then, beggars can't be choosers when it comes to employment, can they? I understand your family has fallen quite far since your father's gaming debts came due." Charlotte felt as though she'd been slapped. "My family's situation is none of your concern, Lord Barton." "Oh, but it is," he replied, leaning closer. "You see, I hold several of your father's notes, quite valuable little papers. I've been most patient about collecting what's owed me." Eleanor's hand gripped Charlotte's arm tightly. Though she couldn't hear the words, she could see the threat in Lord Barton's face, the fear in Charlotte's. "What do you want?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lord Barton's eyes moved to Eleanor, a calculating look crossing his face. "Perhaps we could discuss an arrangement. I've always had a soft spot for my little cousin. I'd be happy to tell you more about her mother. They were so close, you know. Margaret confided everything in me." Before Charlotte could respond, the Duke appeared behind Lord Barton, his tall frame casting a shadow over them. "Barton," he said, his voice cold as ice. "A word, if you please." Lord Barton rose smoothly, the mocking smile back on his face. "Of course, Westmoreland. Always a pleasure." The two men moved to the Duke's study, the door closing firmly behind them. Charlotte turned to Eleanor, whose face had gone white with fear. "What did he say?" Eleanor signed frantically. "What did he want?" Charlotte hesitated, not wanting to translate Lord Barton's threats. "He was being rude. Your father has taken him away to speak privately." Eleanor shook her head. "I saw your face. He said something about my mother, didn't he, and about your father?" Charlotte sighed. Eleanor was too perceptive to fool. "Yes," she admitted. "He claims to have known your mother well, and he says he holds some of my father's gambling debts." Eleanor's hands moved in quick, agitated signs. "He's a bad man. Mother didn't trust him. She told me to stay away from him, always." Charlotte felt a chill at Eleanor's words. What kind of man would a dying woman warn her child against? The evening ended shortly after, the guests departing with polite thanks to the Duke, who had returned from his study alone. Lord Barton was nowhere to be seen. Later that night, as Charlotte helped Eleanor prepare for bed, the Duke knocked at the bedroom door. His face was drawn with tension, the lines around his mouth deeper than usual. "Miss Winters," he said stiffly, "a moment of your time, please." In the hallway outside Eleanor's room, the Duke studied Charlotte's face in the dim light of the wall sconces. "Lord Barton spoke to you this evening. What did he say?" Charlotte hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "He mentioned knowing Lady Eleanor's mother, Your Grace, and he claimed to hold some debts owed by my father." The Duke's jaw tightened. "I see. And did he propose some sort of arrangement?" "He began to, Your Grace, before you interrupted." The Duke nodded slowly. "Miss Winters, I must ask you something, and I require complete honesty. Did you seek employment in my household because of these debts? Was this some scheme concocted between you and Barton?" Charlotte felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. "No, Your Grace. I had never met Lord Barton before tonight. I didn't know he held my father's debts. I came here because—" She stopped, suddenly uncertain how to explain her reasons. "Because?" the Duke prompted, his eyes searching her face. "Because I needed the position," Charlotte said simply. "My family needed the money, but also because when I saw Lady Eleanor at the ball, she seemed so alone. I thought perhaps I could help her." Something flickered in the Duke's eyes, doubt, surprise, she couldn't tell which. "Lord Barton will not be welcome in this house again," he said finally. "Whatever he may have said to you, whatever threats he made, you need not concern yourself with them." "Thank you, Your Grace," Charlotte whispered. As the Duke turned to leave, he paused. "My daughter seems different since you arrived, Miss Winters. More animated, more present." He didn't look at Charlotte as he spoke, his eyes fixed on some point in the darkness beyond the hallway window. "I'm not certain if this is good or bad, but I am watching. With that, he walked away, leaving Charlotte standing alone in the dim hallway, wondering if she had just received a warning or a compliment, and what Lord Barton's next move might be. 3 days after the dinner party, the Duke announced he needed to travel to his country estate to handle urgent business. "I'll be gone for a fortnight," he told Charlotte during their morning meeting in his study. "Mrs. Drake will oversee the household in my absence. You will continue your regular duties with Lady Eleanor." Charlotte nodded, keeping her face carefully neutral. "Of course, Your Grace. Will Lady Eleanor accompany you to the country?" The Duke's eyes flickered toward the window before returning to Charlotte's face. "No, Eleanor dislikes travel. The movement of carriages makes her ill, and she finds new surroundings unsettling." Charlotte thought of Eleanor's sharp eyes, always watching, always learning. How difficult it must be to navigate an unfamiliar place when you couldn't hear warnings or directions. "I understand. We'll maintain our usual schedule here." The Duke hesitated, seeming about to say something more. Instead, he simply nodded. "See that you do, and Miss Winters," his voice dropped slightly, "keep Eleanor away from visitors, especially if Lord Barton should call." "Do you expect him to visit, Your Grace?" Charlotte asked, feeling a chill despite the warm morning sun streaming through the study windows. "Barton rarely does what's expected," the Duke replied grimly. "But he knows he's not welcome here. Still, while I'm away, be vigilant." After the Duke's departure the next morning, a strange quiet settled over Westmoreland House. Many of the servants had accompanied him to the country, leaving the London house half-staffed and eerily silent. Charlotte and Eleanor took advantage of this freedom, abandoning their formal schedule for more enjoyable pursuits. They spent mornings in the library, where Charlotte discovered Eleanor had a quick mind for mathematics and science, subjects her previous tutors had deemed unsuitable for a lady. In the afternoons, they walked in the park when weather permitted, Eleanor teaching Charlotte the signs for different birds and flowers they encountered. One rainy afternoon, as they sat in Eleanor's sitting room practicing more complex signs, Eleanor suddenly put down her hands and reached for her notebook. "I want to visit my mother," she wrote. Charlotte looked up in surprise. "Your mother? You mean her grave?" Eleanor nodded, her blue eyes serious and determined. "But surely your father has taken you there before?" Charlotte asked. Eleanor shook her head, her hands moving in the signs Charlotte now understood easily. "Father never takes me, says it's no place for me, but I remember where it is, St. James's churchyard." Charlotte hesitated. The Duke had instructed them to remain at home, and Mrs. Drake watched their comings and goings with suspicious eyes. But the longing in Eleanor's face was impossible to ignore. "Tomorrow," Charlotte promised, signing the word firmly. "If it's not raining, we'll go tomorrow." The next day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn morning. Charlotte arranged with the coachman for the Duke's smallest carriage to be ready after breakfast. Mrs. Drake frowned when Charlotte informed her of their plans. "His Grace left no instructions about visits to the churchyard," the housekeeper said, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "Lady Eleanor wishes to pay respects to her mother," Charlotte replied firmly. "I see no reason to deny such a proper request. We'll return before tea time." The small churchyard was peaceful, shaded by ancient yew trees, and surrounded by a low stone wall covered in ivy. The coachman helped them down from the carriage, then retreated to wait by the gate. Eleanor led the way confidently through the neat rows of headstones until she stopped before an elegant marble monument. "Margaret Elizabeth Harrington, Duchess of Westmoreland," the inscription read, "beloved wife and mother. Silence too soon." Eleanor knelt beside the grave, her fingers tracing the carved letters of her mother's name. Charlotte stood a few steps back, giving her privacy for this moment. Tears filled her eyes as she watched Eleanor's shoulders shake with silent sobs. After a few minutes, Eleanor rose and turned to Charlotte, her face wet but composed. Her hands moved in graceful signs. "She taught me to be brave, to find my own voice in a silent world." "She would be proud of you," Charlotte signed back. Eleanor shook her head. "Father doesn't see what she saw. He thinks I'm broken." "You're not broken," Charlotte said aloud, her hands emphasizing each word in sign. "You're perfect exactly as you are." Eleanor's eyes widened at Charlotte's fierce expression. Then slowly she smiled, her whole face lighting up with it. She stepped forward and hugged Charlotte tightly. They stood that way for a long moment, the autumn sun warming their backs, the rest of the world forgotten. When they finally broke apart, Charlotte noticed a tall figure watching them from near the church door, Lord Barton. He approached with his usual smooth confidence, bowing slightly as he reached them. "Lady Eleanor, Miss Winters, what a pleasant surprise." Charlotte moved slightly in front of Eleanor, her hand finding Eleanor's and squeezing in warning. "Lord Barton, I didn't expect to see you here." "I often visit on Thursdays," he replied, his eyes fixed on Eleanor, "to pay my respects to dear Margaret. We were very close, you know." Charlotte translated his words into sign for Eleanor, whose face had gone completely still, her public mask firmly in place. Lady Eleanor wished to visit her mother's grave, Charlotte said coolly. We were just leaving. What a shame, Lord Barton replied, stepping closer. I had hoped we might continue our conversation from the other evening about your father's debts, Miss Winters, and about Lady Eleanor's future. Charlotte felt her heart beating faster. I don't think this is the appropriate place, my lord. On the contrary, Lord Barton's voice hardened, this is the perfect place. Margaret would want what's best for her daughter, and I'm certain she would agree that Eleanor needs someone who truly understands her condition. Eleanor tugged at Charlotte's sleeve, her eyes questioning. Charlotte hesitated, then signed a brief summary of Lord Barton's words. Eleanor's hands flew in angry signs. He's lying. Mother never trusted him. Lord Barton watched their exchange with narrowed eyes. Oh, what is she saying? What are those gestures? Lady Eleanor says she wishes to leave now, Charlotte lied, trying to guide Eleanor toward the gate. Lord Barton stepped into their path. I think not. You see, Miss Winters, while the Duke is away, I've taken the liberty of calling in your father's notes. He'll be arrested for debt by morning unless payment is made in full. Charlotte felt as though the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. You wouldn't. I would, he replied coldly, unless we can reach an agreement, one that benefits us all. What kind of agreement? Charlotte asked, though she feared she already knew. A simple one. You'll help me gain Eleanor's trust. When the Duke returns, you'll suggest that I would make an excellent guardian for her. The Duke is not well? Surely you've noticed his headaches, his moments of confusion. When he is declared unfit, someone must manage both Eleanor and the estate. The Duke is perfectly sound, Charlotte protested, and he would never allow you to be Eleanor's guardian. The Duke will have no choice if the courts decide he's incompetent, Lord Barton said, his voice frighteningly reasonable. Think of it, Miss Winters, your father's debts erased, a permanent position for you in the household, and Lady Eleanor would have someone who truly understands what's best for her. Eleanor, who had been watching Lord Barton's face intently, suddenly stepped forward. Though she couldn't hear his words, she could read the threat in his expression. She signed rapidly to Charlotte. Tell him no, tell him my father will never allow it, tell him I would run away first. Charlotte straightened her spine, drawing strength from Eleanor's courage. Lord Barton, neither Lady Eleanor nor I have any interest in your proposal. The Duke will return soon, and he will deal with you then. Lord Barton's face darkened with anger. You stupid girl! Do you think the Duke will keep you on when he learns your father owes thousands of pounds to his enemies? Do you think he'll believe you had no part in this? I could destroy your family with a single letter. Then do it, Charlotte said, her voice shaking but determined. I won't help you hurt Lady Eleanor or the Duke. They're my family now, more than you could ever understand. For a moment, Lord Barton seemed shocked by her defiance. Then he smiled, a cold twist of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. Very well. We'll see how brave you are when your father is in debtor's prison and your mother and sister are on the street. Good day, ladies. He turned and walked away, his tall figure soon disappearing through the churchyard gate. Eleanor clutched Charlotte's arm, her face pale with worry. What did he say? What will he do? Charlotte considered lying, protecting Eleanor from the ugly truth, but Eleanor deserved better than that. Slowly, carefully, she signed everything Lord Barton had said, his threats against her father, his plan to declare the Duke incompetent, his desire to control Eleanor and the Westmoreland fortune. We must tell father when he returns, Eleanor signed, her movements sharp with determination. Yes, Charlotte agreed, but Lord Barton won't wait. He'll move against my family immediately. Eleanor's face set in a look of fierce resolve that reminded Charlotte suddenly of the Duke. Then we must act first, she signed. We must protect your family and warn father. As they rode back to Westmoreland House in silence, Charlotte felt both terror and a strange sense of pride. She had chosen Eleanor and the Duke over her own interests. She had found the courage to stand against Lord Barton's threats. Whatever came next, she knew she had done the right thing. What she didn't know was how to save her family from ruin or how to protect Eleanor from a man determined to control her future. The Duke was 2 days' journey away. Lord Barton could set his plans in motion by nightfall. Don't worry, Eleanor signed, watching Charlotte's troubled face. We're smarter than he is. Mother always said the strongest people are those who must fight the hardest to be heard. Looking into Eleanor's determined blue eyes, Charlotte found herself believing it might be true. Together, Perhaps they could find a way to silence Lord Barton before he destroyed everything they loved. Back at Westmoreland House, Charlotte and Eleanor hurried to Eleanor's sitting room and locked the door behind them. Eleanor's face was flushed with determination as she moved quickly to her desk, pulling out paper, pen, and ink. "What are you doing?" Charlotte signed, watching as Eleanor's slender fingers unstopped the inkwell. "Writing to father," Eleanor signed back, her movements quick and decisive. "We must warn him about Lord Barton." Charlotte nodded, but worry gnawed at her stomach. "A letter will take days to reach him. Lord Barton could act against my family tonight." Eleanor paused, her pen hovering over the paper. She bit her lip, thinking hard, then her eyes lit up. She wrote rapidly on the paper, then turned it so Charlotte could read. "Father's lawyer, Mr. Bennet. His office is on Fleet Street. He can help us. Father trusts him with everything." Hope flickered in Charlotte's chest. "Yes, Mr. Bennet might be able to stop Lord Barton from calling in my father's debts, at least until the Duke returns." Eleanor was already on her feet, pulling a blue cloak from her wardrobe. "We must go now," she signed. "There's no time to wait." "Mrs. Drake will never let us leave again today," Charlotte said, frowning. "She was unhappy enough about our trip to the churchyard." A small, mischievous smile curved Eleanor's lips. "Then we won't ask her," she signed. "There's a servant's staircase that leads to the kitchen gardens. No one will see us leave that way." Charlotte stared at Eleanor in surprise. This was a side of the Duke's daughter she had never seen before. Resourceful, daring, and ready for adventure. "Lady Eleanor Harrington," she said with a smile, "I believe you've been hiding things from me." Eleanor's smile widened. "Mother said sometimes a lady must make her own path," she signed. "She showed me all the secret ways around the house, for when I might need them." 30 minutes later, they slipped through the kitchen garden gate into the narrow alley behind the grand houses of Grosvenor Square. Eleanor led the way confidently, her blue cloak pulled close around her shoulders, her golden hair hidden beneath a plain bonnet. Charlotte followed, amazed at how easily Eleanor navigated the busy London streets. Though she couldn't hear the shouts of street vendors or the rumble of carriage wheels, Eleanor moved with purpose, her eyes constantly scanning her surroundings, noting everything. Mr. Bennet's office was a modest building near the law courts. A brass plate beside the door announced "Bennet and Sons Solicitors" in dignified letters. Eleanor straightened her shoulders and walked in as if she owned the place, Charlotte hurrying behind her. The clerk at the front desk looked up in surprise as they entered. "May I help you, ladies?" he asked, clearly not recognizing them in their plain traveling clothes. "We need to see Mr. Bennet immediately," Charlotte said firmly. "Please tell him Lady Eleanor Harrington is here on urgent business concerning the Duke of Westmoreland." The clerk's eyes widened. He jumped to his feet and bowed hastily. "Of course, my lady. Please wait here. I'll inform Mr. Bennet at once." Mr. Bennet proved to be a small, precise man with kind eyes and a worried frown. He ushered them into his private office, ordered tea, and listened carefully as Charlotte explained their encounter with Lord Barton and his threats against her family. "This is most disturbing," Mr. Bennet said when she had finished. "Lord Barton has been trying to gain influence over the Duke's affairs for years, ever since the Duchess passed away. But to threaten you and your family in this manner, Miss Winters, that is beyond the pale." "Can you help us?" Charlotte asked anxiously. "My father doesn't have the means to pay these debts. If Lord Barton calls them in—" "Let me see what I can do," Mr. Bennet said, rising from his chair. "Lady Eleanor, do I have your permission to act on the Duke's behalf in this matter?" Eleanor, who had been watching their lips carefully throughout the conversation, nodded firmly and wrote on the notepad Mr. Bennet had provided. "Yes, do whatever necessary to stop Lord Barton and protect Miss Winters' family." "Very good," Mr. Bennet said with a small bow. "Miss Winters, I'll need your father's full name and address. Then I suggest you ladies return to Westmoreland House while I handle this situation." Charlotte wrote down her father's information, her hand trembling slightly. "Lord Barton said my father would be arrested by morning." "That won't happen," Mr. Bennet assured her, his voice kind but determined. "The Duke has given me certain discretionary powers in his absence. I believe purchasing your father's debts would fall within those powers, especially given Lord Barton's threats against Lady Eleanor." Relief washed over Charlotte like a wave. "Thank you, Mr. Bennet. I don't know how to repay such kindness." "Your loyalty to Lady Eleanor is payment enough," the lawyer replied with a small smile. "Now, I suggest you return to Westmoreland House before your absence is noted. I'll send word when I've resolved the matter." As they prepared to leave, Eleanor suddenly turned back and wrote one more note. "Check father's medicine. Lord Barton said father was unwell. Could he be poisoning him?" Mr. Bennet's face darkened as he read her words. "A most concerning thought, Lady Eleanor. I'll make inquiries immediately." The journey back to Westmoreland House was tense. Twice Charlotte thought she spotted Lord Barton's tall figure in the crowded streets, but each time it proved to be someone else. They slipped back through the kitchen garden gate just as dusk was falling, hoping their absence hadn't been discovered. They had nearly reached the servants' stairs when a cold voice stopped them in their tracks. "Lady Eleanor, Miss Winters, how interesting to find you entering the house like thieves." Mrs. Drake stood in the dim hallway, her thin face tight with disapproval. Behind her stood Lord Barton, a triumphant smile on his lips. "Mrs. Drake," Charlotte said, trying to keep her voice steady, "we were just taking some air in the garden." "In your travelling cloaks, how odd." Mrs. Drake's eyes narrowed. "Lord Barton has informed me of your situation, Miss Winters. He suggested I keep a close eye on you both while the Duke is away." Eleanor stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. She signed rapidly to Charlotte, her movements sharp and emphatic. "What is she saying?" Lord Barton demanded. Charlotte lifted her chin. "Lady Eleanor wants to know what right you have to be in her home while her father is away." Lord Barton's smile widened. "I've come as a concerned family member, of course. When I heard that the Duke's daughter was being influenced by a young woman whose family owes substantial gambling debts, I felt it my duty to intervene." "I've done nothing wrong," Charlotte said firmly, "and neither has Lady Eleanor. Mr. Bennet will confirm that I have the Duke's full confidence." At the mention of the lawyer's name, Lord Barton's smile faltered slightly. "You've been to see Bennet? How enterprising of you, Miss Winters." "Lord Barton was just leaving," came a new voice from the doorway. Ruth, Eleanor's lady's maid, stood there with two burly footmen behind her. "The Duke left strict instructions that Lord Barton was not to be admitted to the house in his absence. Isn't that right, Mrs. Drake?" The housekeeper's face paled. I wasn't aware." "Now you are," Ruth said calmly. "James, William, please escort Lord Barton to the door." For a moment Lord Barton looked as though he might resist. Then, with a cold laugh, he bowed mockingly to Eleanor. "Well played, little cousin. But this game isn't over yet. Some things even your father's lawyer can't protect you from." After he left, Mrs. Drake turned on Charlotte with a hiss. "You've brought nothing but trouble since you arrived. The Duke will hear of this when he returns." "Yes, he will," Charlotte agreed calmly. "He'll hear how Lord Barton threatened his daughter and tried to gain access to the house against his explicit instructions. He'll hear how you allowed it, Mrs. Drake." The housekeeper's face went white. Without another word, she turned and stalked away. Ruth approached them with a concerned expression. "Are you both all right? I saw you leave through the garden earlier, but didn't want to raise an alarm. When Lord Barton arrived demanding to see you, I knew something was wrong." Eleanor hugged the maid impulsively, then signed to Charlotte. "Lady Eleanor says thank you for protecting us," Charlotte translated, "and she wants to know if you can help us with one more thing." "Of course," Ruth said without hesitation. "We need to search the Duke's medicine cabinet," Charlotte explained. "We have reason to believe someone might be tampering with his health." Ruth's eyes widened. "The Duke has been having terrible headaches these past few months. I've wondered myself if something was wrong. His man Jenkins prepares his medicine, but Mrs. Drake oversees all the household supplies," Charlotte finished grimly. Eleanor's face was set with determination as she signed to Charlotte. "Tell Ruth we need to check Father's medicine tonight, and then we need to send another message to Mr. Bennet." In the Duke's private chambers, they found what they were looking for, a small bottle of headache powder with a nearly invisible difference in color from the Duke's usual medicine. Ruth carefully packed it away to be sent to Mr. Bennet for examination. As they left the Duke's rooms, Charlotte caught Eleanor's hand. "You were amazing today," she signed. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "And father? Will he be proud too?" Charlotte nodded firmly. "Yes. When he sees who you truly are, brave, clever, and strong, he will be the proudest father in England." Eleanor squeezed Charlotte's hand tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you," she signed. "You gave me a voice. You saw me when no one else did." That night, as Charlotte lay in bed waiting for news from Mr. Bennet, she reflected on how much had changed in the weeks since she'd arrived at Westmoreland House. She had come seeking a position, desperate to save her family. Instead, she had found something far more precious, a friend in Eleanor, a purpose in giving her a voice, and perhaps, though she hardly dared admit it to herself, a place where she truly belonged. Whatever Lord Barton might do next, Charlotte knew one thing for certain. She would protect Eleanor with everything she had. Some bonds went beyond duty or employment. Some connections were meant to last a lifetime. 2 years later, Charlotte stood on the terrace of Westmoreland's country estate, watching the golden summer sunset paint the gardens in warm light. The sweet scent of roses drifted up from the flower beds below, where gardeners were finishing their day's work. In the distance, rolling green hills stretched toward the horizon, dotted with sheep that looked like tiny white clouds against the grass. "Beautiful evening," said a deep voice behind her. Charlotte turned to see the Duke approaching, his tall figure silhouetted against the warm light spilling from the house. He looked younger somehow. The stern lines of his face softened by the past 2 years. The headaches that had plagued him, caused, as Mr. Bennet's investigation proved, by small amounts of poison Lord Barton had bribed a servant to add to his medicine, were long gone. "Indeed it is, Your Grace," Charlotte replied with a smile. "Eleanor is sketching in the rose garden. She says the light is perfect just now." The Duke nodded, coming to stand beside her at the stone balustrade. "My daughter has quite a gift. The London Art Society has asked if they might display some of her work at their exhibition next month." "That's wonderful news," Charlotte said, her heart swelling with pride. "Will you allow it?" "I've already said yes," the Duke answered, his eyes on the distant figure of his daughter bent over her sketchbook among the roses. "Eleanor should share her talents with the world. I was wrong to try to hide her away." How much had changed since that day when Lord Barton's schemes had been revealed. The Duke had returned from the country in a fury upon receiving Mr. Bennet's urgent message. Lord Barton had been arrested, his plot to poison the Duke exposed, and he now resided in a prison cell across the sea in Australia, unlikely ever to return to England. As for Mrs. Drake, she had been dismissed immediately, replaced by Ruth as the new housekeeper. The Duke had asked few questions about how Charlotte and Eleanor had discovered the plot. He simply listened as Mr. Bennet explained how his daughter and her companion had acted with courage and foresight to protect the Westmoreland family. "Charlotte," the Duke said now, using her given name as he had begun to do in recent months, "there is something I've been meaning to discuss with you." Charlotte turned to face him, noting the unusual uncertainty in his expression. "Yes, Your Grace? I've had a letter from Lady Pembroke," he began, referring to a neighbour whose son had taken a particular interest in Eleanor during the local assemblies. "It seems her son wishes to pay his addresses to Eleanor," Charlotte smiled. "Yes, I know. Eleanor has mentioned him several times in our conversations." The Duke raised an eyebrow. "And She likes him very much," Charlotte said gently. "He's taken the trouble to learn some signs, you know. They can communicate quite well now." Relief flickered across the Duke's face. "That's good, very good." He paused, staring out at the gardens again. "If Eleanor marries, she'll need you with her, of course, as her interpreter, her friend." Charlotte's heart skipped. "That would be up to Eleanor and her husband, surely. And if I asked you to stay?" The Duke's voice had dropped lower, his dark blue eyes now fixed intently on her face. "Not as Eleanor's companion, but in another capacity entirely." Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Over the past 2 years, as they had worked together to help Eleanor find her place in society, something had grown between her and the Duke, a partnership, a friendship, and perhaps something more, but she had never dared to hope. "What capacity did you have in mind, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering, the Duke reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a ring with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "This was my mother's," he said quietly. "Margaret never wore it. She preferred simpler jewelry, but I hope, you might like it." Charlotte stared at the ring, then at the Duke's face, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Your Grace, are you—" "James," he corrected gently. "My name is James, Charlotte. And yes, I am asking you to become my wife, if you'll have me." For a moment, Charlotte couldn't speak. She thought of her first days at Westmoreland House, how lost and small she had felt amid its grandeur. She thought of Eleanor's friendship, which had given her strength and purpose. And she thought of this man before her, who had changed so much, learning to sign with his daughter, opening his home and his heart after years of keeping both tightly closed. "What will people say?" she asked finally, thinking of the gossip that would surely follow if the Duke of Westmoreland married his daughter's companion, a woman with no fortune and a tarnished family name. The Duke, James, smiled, a full, warm smile that transformed his face. "They will say I am the luckiest man in England to have found not one but two extraordinary women to love. They will say that Charlotte Winters saw what was truly important when others were blinded by appearances. And in time they will say nothing at all, because our happiness will be too ordinary to remark upon." From the garden below came a flurry of movement. Eleanor had spotted them on the terrace and was hurrying up the stone steps, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her golden hair coming loose from its pins in the evening breeze. "Have you asked her?" She signed eagerly as she reached them, her blue eyes bright with excitement. "Did she say yes?" James laughed, looking from his daughter to Charlotte with tender affection. "I've asked, but Miss Winters hasn't yet given me her answer." Eleanor turned to Charlotte, her hands moving in the graceful signs that had become as natural to them as breathing. "Please say yes. I've known Father loved you since that day you stood up to Lord Barton. He just needed time to admit it to himself." Charlotte felt tears well in her eyes as she looked at this young woman who had become like a sister to her. "You wouldn't mind having me as your stepmother instead of your companion?" "Mind?" Eleanor signed, her expression incredulous. "It was my idea to—" "I've been dropping hints to Father for months," James chuckled. "It's true, my daughter has become quite the matchmaker, though I'd like to think I would have found the courage to ask you eventually, even without her encouragement." Charlotte looked from father to daughter, these two people who had become her family in every way that mattered. 2 years ago, she had entered Westmoreland House desperate and afraid, seeking only a position that would save her family from ruin. Instead, she had found a home, a purpose, and a love she had never dared to dream of. "Yes," she said simply, her voice steady even as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Yes, I will marry you, James." His face lit with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then lifted her hand to his lips. Eleanor clapped her hands in delight, then wrapped them both in a fierce embrace. Later that evening after dinner, the three of them sat in the library. Eleanor was explaining her latest sketches to her father, her hands flying in animated signs that he followed with careful attention. Charlotte watched them from her seat by the fire, the Duke's sapphire ring catching the light on her finger. She thought of that first ball where she had stood in the corner, invisible and afraid, watching a world she no longer belonged to. How different things were now. Her mother's health had been restored thanks to the best doctors in London. Emma had made a happy marriage to a kind young clergyman. Even her father had found purpose again, managing a small portion of the Duke's estates with unexpected skill. As for Charlotte herself, once Miss Winters of the faded fortunes, now soon to be the Duchess of Westmoreland, she had discovered that sometimes life's greatest disappointments led to its greatest joys. The path that had seemed like a fall from grace had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Eleanor caught her eye across the room and smiled, her hand signing 3 simple words: "Thank you for everything." Charlotte signed back the words that had become their private pledge over the past 2 years, always for everything. James watched this exchange with warm eyes, no longer troubled by the silent language that had once seemed to exclude him. Now he understood that some things were too important, too precious to be spoken aloud. Some connections ran deeper than words could express. Outside the library windows, stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside, the fire crackled softly in the grate, casting a golden glow over the 3 figures who had once been strangers, now bound together by love and understanding. Charlotte had entered Westmoreland House, believing she was sacrificing her future to save her family. Instead, she had found her true home, not in the grandeur of ducal estates or the promise of a title, but in the hearts of a father and daughter who had been waiting in their different ways for someone who could truly see them. And in seeing them, their pain, their courage, their capacity for love, Charlotte had finally truly seen herself.